With every single passing day, I tell you this without the fear of contradiction, African leaders are becoming more and more audacious. We're seeing African leaders begin to call out the double standard that they've been subjected to by the international community when it comes to matters of politics, diplomacy, and human rights. And the latest African leader to jump on that bandwagon is Julius Malema of the Economic Freedom Forum. And he's not mincing his words. First of all, he doesn't have kind things to say about the ICC because of the double standard of that court, and he is saying that if South Africa is to help ICC arrest Putin or stand behind the ICC on the arrest warrant on Putin, the ICC must first arrest all the American leaders that have committed atrocities against human rights, not just in the Middle East, but also in Africa.
Tony Blair admitted that they made a horrible mistake when it comes to Saddam Hussein. They've not been charged today. Bush is still there. They've not been charged till to date. And then Obama killed Gaddafi. And then nothing has happened. We're here today with Libya being destroyed and unable to recover because of America.
Hello guys, how are you doing? Welcome to another episode of this videos. My name is Ndiro Ganga. It's always a pleasure to sit down here and chat with you about matters Africa, African leaders, and their position and relation with the West. I have a YouTube channel at Ndiro Ganga where I discuss diaspora relocation to the continent, and you can always connect with me on social media at Ndiro Oganga. Let's jump straight into today's video. And I like doing some of these videos because it just gives me a lot of hope, and it just means that Africans are beginning to wake up and realize that their position is not under the table but actually on the table. So Julius Malema is one of the political leaders in South Africa. He is in charge of the Economic Freedom Fighters Forum. And one of the most amazing things about Julius Malema is he doesn't hold back. He says it as he sees it, as he feels it, as it is. And he's not mincing his words. So most recently, the ICC has been on Putin because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And this video is not to excuse anything that is happening in Ukraine, but rather just to put into context how the international community sort of applies double standard when it even comes to justice. A couple of years back, almost a year back, Russia invaded Ukraine, and we will not get into the politics of that, but we all know that when there's a war, there'll be fatalities, children will suffer, women will suffer, and the ICC is now on Putin, and he has to pay for all the things that have happened in the Ukraine because he's the leader of the country that has invaded another country. And the thing about the ICC is that when they want to arrest somebody, they'll put pressure on all the other countries that sort of have any form of relationship with the leader that they're pursuing. I remember back when they were after Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, and they sort of asked or borderline threatened countries that would have any relationship with Omar al-Bashir or any country that he would go to, if they will not give him up to the authorities, then there will be repercussions. Anyway, nothing of that sort ever happened. Omar al-Bashir reduced his travel, and he was very careful with some of the places that he went to. But we are almost seeing the same tone being adopted when it comes to Putin. And Julius Malema is not having it. So South Africa is now South Africa has always had a good relationship with Russia, but it's building onto that. And we are seeing a lot of talks when it comes to BRICS. And it's also the same time that the ICC is saying we want to arrest Putin, and anybody that can bring him to us will be highly appreciated, but also we warn you against relating with such a person because there'll be international retaliation if you choose to do business or align yourself with somebody who has a case to answer the ICC. And Julius Malema is saying, listen, until you arrest some of the people in America that have committed atrocities against human rights all over the world, it is just lip service to warn us against Putin.
ICC, Putin is welcomed here. And no one is going to arrest Putin. If needs be, we'll go and fetch Putin from the airport to his meeting. He will finish all his meetings. We'll take him back to the airport. We're not going to be told by these hypocrites of the International Criminal Court who know the real violators of human rights, who know the murderers of this world. That former Prime Minister of Tony Blair admitted that they made a horrible mistake when it comes to Saddam Hussein. They've not been charged today. Bush is still there. They've not been charged till to date. And then Obama killed Gaddafi. And then nothing has happened. We're here today with Libya being destroyed and unable to recover because of America. We know very well that where NATO gets involved, those are terrorists. We know very well where the US says we're going in to install peace. That place will never know peace as long as America has visited that place. So we don't want ICC's hypocrisy to apply here in our country.
You might be surprised why South Africa or the South African leader is taking such a stand when it comes to matters Russia, the Russian president, and the relationship between South Africa and Russia. Now, when I was listening to this speech, and I will play you the soundbite just shortly, apparently South Africa has history with Russia, and Russia was one of the countries that stood with South Africa when they were fighting against for their freedom, rather, back in the years. And Russia was a very instrumental force in aiding South Africa to earn its independence. And even that aside, that was back in the days. Right now, the strategic position of Russia on the continent cannot be underplayed. Many of the African countries import almost 30% of their grain from Russia. That is maize, that is wheat. Most of the fertilizer on the continent comes from Russia. You know, President Putin has been very open. He opened his doors to African leaders, and they traveled to Russia to have the Russia-Africa Summit, where the country had a conversation with the continent on how better we can do business and how we can become good trading partners. And most of the time when this happens with Americas and Europe, it's almost like we are here, the Western world is here to tell you what they're going to do with you and for you, and you have no place. And from that Russian summit, it almost felt like African leaders were having a conversation with their peer. And do not be deceived, that influences a lot of policies in terms of trade, in terms of lending. And so Julius Malema says they will stand with Russia because of how important and how much of an ally Russia has been to South Africa.
President Putin is welcomed. We know our friends. We know the people who liberated us. We know the people who supported us. In Kuto-Konaval, the weapons that were used in Kuto-Konaval that led to the liberation of South Africa were coming from Russia. Russia supplied us with weapons in Kuto-Konaval. Cuba supplied us with soldiers. MK was drunk. Cuba brought the soldiers. Russia brought the armaments. We were supposed to be the ones that are being complimented and supported by these other countries who were found wanting.
And you know, the double standard is not just with the ICC, it's across the world, you know. South Africans are out in the streets, they're demonstrating against several things, and these are things that you cannot downplay, right? When people are saying we want constant electricity, it's because businesses rely on power to be able to produce. And South Africans are saying we want the cost of living to go down. It's not because they want a Rolex, it's because they want to afford their daily meal. And then you'll find international organizations beginning to label the leaders of mass mobilization and mass protest as domestic terrorists, and that raises a lot of eyebrows, to be honest with you, right? And you will also find it's happened also in Kenya, where when people go out to the streets to to sort of demonstrate we want the cost of living to go down. Americas and Europe are the first people to say, oh, relax, you will destabilize the country, blah, blah. No, there are like 13 experts on the continent and millions of Africans that are fighting for a better life for themselves and their children. And because these mass mobilizations do not favor their agenda, and there are 3 people on the continent, and that's just like a figure of speech, then you can't go on the streets unless they label you. They want the status quo to continue because it's always of benefit to them. And Malema is saying, listen, this double standard does not work here. You've been harboring terrorists. The families of corrupt politicians live in your capital cities, they pay taxes, they buy your luxury goods, and that's acceptable there. But when we're calling for better services on the continent, you want to label us terrorists? It doesn't work like that.
Can you imagine that terrorist that America killed, Osama bin Laden? His organization being declared a terrorist organization, and then he stays in Washington. How do you reconcile the two? That the British government says the ANC, it's a terrorist organization. Its president and his family and children stay in London and they go to schools in London. Children of Osama bin Laden going to school in Washington. How do you reconcile that?
Well, guys, Julius Malema is a very fiery leader, and he's very fierce, he's very unapologetic, and he says it as he says it. Now, such people are very important on the continent because in as much as we want the fast liberation, there's so much that Africa still needs to liberate itself from. For example, the shackles of neocolonialism, and it's going to be such a long and gruesome fight before we get there. Anyway, those were just my thoughts. I want to hear what your thoughts are on what Julius Malema said regarding the ICC and, you know, calling it a kangaroo court. I would also like to hear what you have to say about his support of Russia and Russia being an ally to Africa, and also just the West being uncomfortable with mass mobilization on the continent, yet Africans are just asking for better living conditions. Yet nobody is calling out the protests in France. But in Africa, you're not comfortable? Excuse me? Anyway, my name is Ndero Oganga. Catch me on my YouTube channel at Ndero Oganga, or connect with me on social media at Ndero Oganga. I'll see you again next time.